All right, let's see if I can get this intro right because this is the first live session where I've moved the date. So this is Learning Tech Talks. We're back again. Landscape of learning and workplace tech. I'm expanding the intro because we're treading into space. I feel like the dividers of learning and workplace tech are just they're getting eradicated. So anyway, learning and workplace tech. Today I'm joined by, here we go. Let's see how I do on this. Kian Katanfarouche. Yeah. Oh,
Pretty
look
good.
at that. And you know what? Hey folks, for that was my first attempt backstage and I was all right. Keon even said, I think you could be a native, although I definitely am not, but I'll take that as a compliment. And he's from Workera. We're going to be talking precision reskilling, upskilling, right skilling, whatever term is kind of the buzz that's going on right now. But really the conversation is addressing this whole thing in terms of, we're talking measurement. Like, how do you actually do this in a way that is quantifiable versus just qualitative or subjective? And at the same time, then digging deeper into what does that actually look like and what can we do with it? So we've got a lot planned. I'm excited to have this conversation. How about you?
I'm very excited. I'm an avid listener of the show, and I learn a lot from it. So hopefully, I can share some of our insights.
Well, you've got a lot. You know what? From being backstage with you, I already know you've got a lot to share. So I'm looking to unpacking this, and I think there's going to be a lot of folks that can take a lot of this because this is a conversation that's happening at basically every company I talk to. This is a in some shape or form, and it's not just in HR and learning. It's happening in operations, in every function of the business. So it's relevant regardless of where you sit. But before we get into that piece of it, we got to get to know you a little bit better and have some fun as people start joining in. So the first question I always ask, it's a slow pitch, should be easy. And for folks joining, please comment in because it's an engaging dialogue, and I got to get comments going so you can comment in your questions throughout and I can bring it up here. But for you, Kian, where are you located today?
So despite growing up in France, next to the city of love, Paris, I moved to California, and I'm now in the city of fog, San Francisco.
Okay. All right. So you're in the Bay Area, and I got to say, I commented on this. You've got probably one of the coolest backgrounds I think I've had from a guest. There is a lot to admire in the background. So I always like that because then it's just interesting. I was actually observing the anchors on, I think those are your sheets or like the top spread on your bed. Pretty cool.
Exactly,
I like
exactly.
it. So I'm where I always am. My background never changes. I feel like if I ever do one of these episodes and the background's wildly different, people aren't even going to know how to respond to it. So here in Wisconsin, as usual. So the other question for you, and I'm curious because you've got lots of data on this, you're talking to lots of folks, but I'd also love your personal opinion. What is a skill? We're talking about skills that, as you've seen what's happened in the recent years, that if you said, hey, universally, and maybe there's not a universal, but a vast majority, if you could tell people this is a gap I see across the board, what would that skill be for folks?
Yeah, I think a timely skill to learn is how to work remotely. I think the world is changing. More and more companies are hiring remotely. You can now work for a company that is in a different country or located in a different country than you are. But it takes a lot of time and effort to work remotely, and it doesn't happen magically. For example, we are split across 15 different countries. So we had to figure out what it means to work remotely and train our teams to work remotely. Okay. That means learning how to document and how to share and when to share and who to share with. We had to learn what tech stack to use. So we have asynchronous communication, we have synchronous communication, we have text communication, audio communication, video communication, depending on what message you're trying to convey. And then generally speaking, I think there's a lot of cultural challenges when working remotely because you tend to work with different cultures, and being open-minded and receptive to the variety of cultures in a team is also a skill that needs to be developed.
Okay. Well, you know that's overwhelming. The thing about it that I think is interesting about that one is I agree with you. I think as in general, people are languishing in this area in terms of being like, I don't really know how to do this very well. And I think part of the problem that you just unpacked is it's extremely multifaceted. When you think about the complexities of I mean, hybrid work, remote, whatever you want to call it, where I mean, people are all over and they're doing different things, and you're trying to figure out, how do we communicate? How do we collaborate? What are the different tools? Then you layer on all the technology that's on top of it, where I mean, I know even with my own team, sometimes it's like, well, which app are we using for this? And you're like, and if people don't know, it feels very confusing and overwhelming for folks. So I would tend to agree with you on this, and I don't think we're going back. So I think universally, we've got some skill development to happen. I'm probably going to support. Go for it.
No, I was going to say some companies are going back, but I think as a job seeker, or as a member of the community, you're closing your career to a subset if you're not working remotely, and so the number of opportunities available to folks is just drastically smaller if they don't work remotely, which is a consideration to take.
I think it was Apple. I just saw a news article the other day. Apple, like April 1st is kind of the expectation. I'll be interested to see how that plays out for them, because depending on who you talk to, there's some folks that really are like, if that happens, I'm not going to go. Now, Apple may be able to pull it off because they're Apple. And so some people might be willing to kind of deal with it. And hey, they've got a pretty cool campus. So I suppose if you're already living out there, it's not the worst place to have to go every day.
Indeed.
But I agree. You're limiting your talent pool. It's risky business to kind of take such a hard stance on it. So will be interesting to watch as 2022 plays out. Okay, so let me transition, because I don't have another skill to add to that, because I was actually going to say, I guess the one, you know what, I'm not even going to go there because we're too far in and we'll end up taking way too much time, and then that'll be the discussion, and that's not the point, even though it's related to skills. So let's do this piece, because you started Workera. We are going to describe what it is, but I am curious your background, because we're talking AI, skill development, all this stuff. How did you end up leading a company that's focused on that? Or do you have a background in tech development? Like where did that come from?
I'm trained as an engineer.
Okay.
And I started my first companies quite early during my studies, and learned a lot from it. Developed a passion for education. I think it comes from my parents, who did not manage to finish their education the way they wanted because of a revolution, and so I always was led to understand how important education can be and how it can change people's lives. Okay. And so I delved deep into it. I joined Stanford many years ago, where my focus was on artificial intelligence. I was advised by Professor Andrew Ng, who's also the co-founder of Coursera. And he's now the chairman of Workera. Learned a lot from him. Ended up creating AI classes with him that we were fortunate to teach to millions of people in a very short amount of time. So seeing firsthand how people learn and build AI applications to impact their own industries across the world. Noticing that the feedback that companies and learners alike were giving us at that moment is that they are drowning in an ocean of content, and the content is not anymore the limiting factor in order to grow a career or to build skills. But the questions that they would ask us were, what are the skills that we have? We don't know. What are the skills we don't have? What are the skills we need to build to build the future, and how to learn them, and also how to measure our improvement and know where we stand all along the way. And so I spent a few years delving deep into measurements, taking learnings from our field, artificial intelligence, mixing it with knowledge from psychometrics, mixing it with knowledge from enterprise upskilling, and then this led to Workera. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and this ties back. There's two things that, based on what you just said, I want to kind of unpack a little bit. Is one, we talked about this a little bit before we went live, is there's kind of these two spectrums. One is there's the AI for education, and then there's the education of AI, like actually, like how is AI changing the way we develop, skill, educate people? But then there's also that, well, how do we teach people about this stuff in the first place? And so your start was really, was it a combination of both, or did you start with the, well, how do we teach people AI, and then you went, well, actually this has kind of a dramatic impact on the way we do it, so why don't we kind of combine the two together?
Yeah, we do both at Workera, but it gets confusing. So I like to think about those two things as separate. So education of AI is really companies are trying to transform. They're feeling that they're going to get disrupted if they don't get to the digital level, to the data level, to the AI level. And so they're learning about AI. They're learning about models. They're learning about methods to train the models. They're learning about the technology stacks that they need to put in place, or the infrastructure. And that's education of AI. We need to teach the workforce all these things.
Okay.
And then on the other side, you have education, talent, HR technologies that are more and more digital. So data is generated, and then you can start modeling on top of it and adding AI technologies in order to bring personalization, bring filtering, bring search, bring ranking, and really improve the way people learn and achieve their fullest potential.
Okay. So on that first one, I'm curious your take. I got a point of view on this, but I'd love yours, since I mean, I didn't go to Stanford. I don't have any of the cool credentials you do on this. So I'm actually really curious when it comes to this AI, or I kind of think of it as digital acumen for the enterprise. Where do you see that level? Is it something, because I've heard debates at the leadership level before where it's, well, the workforce doesn't really need to know that. And then other orgs are on the other side where they go, well, everybody needs to know a high degree of it. What's been your take? Is it a mix? Like where does the acumen of an organization need to be with where AI is going?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think of AI or data transformation. And by the way, every time I mention AI or data, I don't just mean like hardcore machine learning or deep learning. I mean,
it's a good distinction, because we said that before we went live. There is this, just even people throw that term around.
Yeah.
And that can be a lot.
Yeah, I think it encompasses anything from, modeling, machine learning, deep learning, whatever it is, all the way down to, analytics, business intelligence, just, general software or digital or business acumen related to analytics. So all of that, I encompass it under AI and data, because that's what companies are trying to develop in terms of skills. But to go back to your question, I think companies need to think about transformation company-wide. It means if you want to build today a data or AI company, you need to have obviously the high level of AI practitioners, those who build the models, the AI systems, they deploy it in production. Those are usually referred to as the center of excellence. But they're not the only ones in the company. There is actually a much bigger group of subject matter experts. So for example, if you're a telco company, you have tons of network engineers that are experts at what they do. If you're an aerospace company, you have a ton of people who know electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, propulsion, all of that. And this is actually the largest group, in my opinion, today. And if I may give you a data point, in the class I'm teaching at Stanford, the deep learning class, 2/3 of the students are not majoring in computer science, despite the class being a graduate class in computer science. They come from all the other departments in the campus, and they are coming to build an AI toolkit in conjunction with their subject matter expertise. Because if you look at an X-ray and you're trying to detect pneumonia, let's say, with an object detector, a certain pathology, well, if you're a medical expert, you understand the pathology, you understand what the models need to look at, you understand the stakeholders that will need to get involved, you understand the clinical deployment environment, all of the things that I don't understand. So I'm not going to be the right person to deploy that model, but they will.
Okay. No, well, I love that you bring that up, because I think that is sometimes an area of opportunity for organizations where they go, well, we've got all our AI developers and they're over here, and that's where we're making all our investments in understanding this. And to your point, it's a great example of, okay, that's fine, but that's more the center of excellence. Like, what are the best practices that we need to know and how to do this, and the expertise. So when you get stuck, we can tap into you for support, but you really understand what it is that needs to happen. So you need to have that. And I personally, so my experience has been, I've even taken it a step further. I worked with a healthcare company where, and again, you have to personalize it. You don't just make everybody get an MBA, a graduate degree in data science. No, that's not what we're talking about. But even the frontline sales teams, I was working with a
Of
healthcare
course.
company, and I'm like, if they don't fundamentally understand how AI works when they're trying to describe and even just explain and position how the products are better or superior, you can't just go, well, it has AI. And then when somebody goes, right, but what does that do? You're asking us to make
Yeah,
a
yeah,
multi-million-dollar investment, and they just go blank stare because they go, well, I don't really know. Like, there is that level of even frontline that needs to have a level of acumen around this to be
yeah.
able to describe what's happening.
Yeah, 100%. I was yeah, I was gonna say our the pyramidal framework that I generally recommend is the center of excellence, the AI plus X group that we just talked about, and then
Yep,
you have AI fluent and AI literate, or data fluent and data literate.
I like that.
Fluent would be everybody who is interacting with technical counterparts. So
Okay,
if you're more and more recruiters today are asked to bring in data scientists, if they don't know what a data scientist is, or what's the difference between a machine learning engineer, a software engineer, a data scientist, a data analyst, a data engineer, how are they supposed to do it? If they don't understand what TensorFlow is, what PyTorch is, what are all these frameworks that are used in machine learning, they cannot really recruit and have that first conversation, or even sell the projects of the company to attract those talents and excite them about the projects. And similarly, to go back to what you were saying, frontline workers, AI literacy, data literacy, companies are investing heavily in those areas. And at Workera, we are actually benchmarking the level of literacy in AI and data in the enterprise, the fluency level in the enterprise, the AI plus X level, and all the way to the center of excellence. Yeah.
okay. Which we're going to get to why, because there's some real value to why that's happening. But I love that you break that down, because the recruiting example, because I know there's a fair amount of HR and learning leaders in here. I think sometimes, and you look at where the talent market's at right now, sometimes you can even say, even to be able to vet candidates. So you can look at
Mhm.
it from a very organization centric, well, it helps us better have those conversations. But at a time right now where the talent market is hot, and I can just tell you from talking to talent acquisition leaders,
Yeah.
trying to recruit these people right now is a competitive business. And you're doing just as much selling on, these are the kind of, like you said, these are the kind of projects we're working on. Here's where we're going. This is the kind of work that's being done in our organization. If the people that are having those initial conversations don't understand what they're talking about, you can be losing talent because you may be doing the coolest, most exciting things in the space. And if you can't get that message out and help people understand that, those people are going to walk to somewhere else that goes, we did a better job selling it. So I think that frontline connection, or I like the distinction between, hey, everybody just needs to at least have working knowledge, but anybody who's interacting at any degree should be literate and be able to articulate this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because we've been talking quite a bit now about AI and what's all happening, and we've mentioned Workera. You've dropped a few hints at some of the things you do. How do you describe it to folks? Because there's a lot of marketing speak flying all over the place, but when you actually sit down with someone and they say, "So what does Workera do?" How do you describe it so that somebody goes, "Oh, okay, that makes sense."
Yeah. I would say that at a high level, Workera is not a content provider. That's why I clarified at the beginning. We don't create educational content. We are a skills technology company that can help organizations, whether it is an enterprise, a government, or another organization, measure, develop, and analyze and track the development of skills in the company. The two main offerings that we have is computer adaptive skills assessment that is highly rigorous and precise, very granular, and a precision upskilling platform where we deliver, based on the skills data, personalized learning plans to the workforce to make sure that they're learning effectively, and through their learning, everything is being measured and an improvement can be demonstrated. The content that is featured in those learning plans is free content that is available and that we have indexed online and curated carefully. It can be paid for enterprises who have purchased a license, and we have integrations with the likes of Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, other platforms, or even content that has been developed in-house and enterprises want us to index in those learning plans.
Yeah. Okay. But to your point, and I think this is an important one for folks well, I would say even in the L&D and outside the L&D space, is the fact that a lot of times we do over-index on the content piece. We over-index on that. Well, if we just get the right I love the fact you said we've kind of curated some of this free content, because was there a point where there wasn't enough content? I would say yes. There was a stage at some point where we didn't have enough stuff. I don't know that that's really the problem anymore. It's like you said earlier, the sea of content that's like, so on this assessment piece, I want to dig into this a little bit. And Rebecca, I see your question, so I promise I will get to it. I am curious though on this, when you say assessment, because I've seen this used very loosely in terms of we're assessing skills. Unpack for me a little bit what you mean when you say skill assessment, because there is a wide spectrum when people say, well, we assess skills.
Yeah, that's very important actually to clarify. So let me start by saying that what we mean by skills assessment is extremely granular skill assessment. In other words, something like machine learning is not a skill for us. And many platforms will talk about machine learning as a skill. Learners will complete a course in machine learning and would say, I have the machine learning skill.
Right.
Or I don't have
I'm a +3. I'm a +3 in machine learning because I took this overview course on machine learning.
Exactly. Or even sometimes it's scraped on a document, on a resume, and it's mentioned and there's a keyword, and so the person has the machine learning skill. We don't think about it like that. For us, machine learning is a domain that breaks down into subdomains, understanding the models, understanding the method to train the models, understanding how to structure machine learning projects. Those subdomains break down into topics, which break down into subtopics, which break down into skills. And so at the end of the day, machine learning is hundreds of skills that can be measured with a highly reliable and valid computer adaptive assessments. And so we do the item writing in-house. So we have an entire process with psychometricians that allow us to make sure whatever we write is measuring what it's supposed to measure. Because it's easy to write a quiz, it's very hard to write a rigorous assessment that measures the right levels of cognition across these, all these skills. And then we have our computer adaptive platform. You want to make sure that you are being effective at measuring. You want to measure people across thousands of skills, but you don't have thousands of hours to measure them across thousands of skills. So you need to be effective. You need to make sure that every question that is served to a user is served for a purpose, because you're trying to uncover something based on the history that you have with that user. And so we build our platform in order to maximize the information about the test taker and be able to serve them rich feedback as granular as possible. Here is where you're good at. These are the 75 skills that we think you have today. These are the 72 skills that we think you need to improve in. And then based on that feedback, we generate the personalized learning plan, and we call that precision upskilling.
Okay. I really, so Rebecca's question, and I think hopefully Rebecca comment in and you can add clarifying questions if you want, but I think hopefully that actually paints a really good picture on what you mean by this in terms of, well, how do you actually fill those gaps? Because what you just brought up to me is a big challenge, and it's an opportunity area that I've seen in a lot of areas where machine learning is an example. You see it in power skills too, communication.
Exactly.
Communication is not a skill. Communication is hundreds of skills. I just even think remote work, that is hundreds of skills. And even within those skills, there are different tiers of capability within those skills. So the granularity, I think sometimes we're trying to, and this is the question that's going to come on the heels of this, is that sometimes we almost want to oversimplify it. Like, what are the 5 questions we can ask to assess whether somebody has machine learning skills? And it's like, well, we kind of can't. So I'm curious how, because that could sound really overwhelming to be like, good grief, you're talking hundreds of skills and all this other stuff. Like, what does this assessment take 2.5 weeks to complete? I mean, how do you optimize that so it doesn't overwhelm a user?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One thing is our technology allows us to ask a few questions, but actually leverage the power of data and the tens of thousands of people that have taken the same computer adaptive assessments in order to generate insights over more skills.
Okay.
That's one thing. So this is very time efficient. The second thing is when we work with an enterprise, we want to make sure that we are configuring the assessments properly for what they need. And so the upfront work is to put together those configurations. What does the workforce of the future look like for you? What are the skills that you want your workforce to demonstrate? Define a career progression plan, not based on the courses they need to complete, but based on the skills they need to demonstrate. If you tell learners, hey, this is a course and it's mandatory for all hundreds of you, you have to take it, and then you move to that one, I can guarantee very few will complete it. They're going to say it's too easy, it's too hard, it's not relevant, whatever. No, here you can define every domains where you want the skills to be demonstrated, and you can also calibrate the target score, and we provide you with definitions of what does it mean to have a 75 in machine learning or in data science or in business analytics. What does it mean to have 200 points in those areas? What can you expect them to do on a project? And so managers, leaders, L&D folks come in, work with us in order to do this calibration process and build the configurations. And then those are deployed and served in our software platform to all their users. They take the test, they get their feedback, and then based on the feedback, they will get their personalized learning plan.
Okay. So I've got some follow-up stuff on this, but I want to emphasize the point because I think this is a takeaway that anybody in the space can walk from, is that front end work to me is critical, and not doing that is going to set you up for failure, because that piece of the traditional approach of, I mean, I'm just thinking, we'll just use a hypothetical that I'm sure nobody's ever experienced in their whole careers. But let's just, put this out there. I imagine someone somewhere has at some point experienced somebody saying, we need everyone to know machine learning. So let's assign this course to everyone in the company and see what happens. And then they're frustrated. Leaders are frustrated because they feel like, well, we don't have the skills. People are frustrated because they feel like, well, good grief, you assigned me a bunch of stuff that I have this doesn't have any context for me whatsoever. It's just a mess. It's just a hot mess of things. So that front end piece takes some time. My follow-up question to that is, though, that is an uncommon conversation, or less common than it needs to be for a lot of people. And I will say a lot of leaders aren't used to having that conversation of not only what do your people need to do today at this micro level, not this, well, they have to machine learning. No. I'm not asking you machine. I'm saying, what are you trying to accomplish? What are the skills? How good do they have to be? Like, a lot of leaders have struggled with that. And even just the mindset of, you need to think about this now. How do you help drive that conversation with leaders? Because that is unfamiliar territory for, I think, a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's a very big question. I'm going to try to break it down on my end, but I think measurement is the tip of the spear of any talent strategy. You cannot come up with a strategy if you don't know the current state of the nation. And so we always start there. We assess, and we usually have the first configuration. We recommend maybe 1 to 2 hours of assessments for the workforce. And there's insights generated from that assessment. We have an executive readout where we provide all the information at an aggregate level of, here is what you have, here is what you don't have. And then people suddenly realize maybe the content you purchased was actually not the right one to purchase because it's not relevant for the current state of the workforce. They realize that actually there's several emerging groups in the workforce and not everybody has the same acumen. As an example, a mechanical engineer is usually going to be super strong in linear algebra, and so they have a head start in data and AI compared to another sort of engineer. You have to take all of that into account. And so the tip of the spear is the measurement piece. Once you have the measurement piece, then you can do a ton with it. Everything becomes clearer. What do we need to upskill? How long is it going to take? Can you provide us estimates? What is the content that we need to purchase? Is it freely available? Is it paid? Help us with all of that. But we really stress that this measurement piece is the tip of the spear of a talent strategy. And oftentimes it gets us to very interesting conversations with the learning community, where once you have this data or the skill signal, as we call it, that is generated not only upfront but always continuously. It's like a continuous pulse over the skills in the organization with all the dashboards and the analytics. Then you can think about precision upskilling. How can I deliver mentorship at scale to every employee so that they almost have a pocket mentor that is telling them, here is the content that we recommend for you because of your level of ability, because of your skills gap. But once you have all these benchmarks internally, you can start comparing yourselves to the best in class out there. You can start using the same assessments for your job applicants. And now you know that Alice, who's an applicant, is actually filling up that gap in this team. And we have exactly the data because we've measured both internally and externally, and everything becomes connected. And I love when HR or talent or learning practitioners think about talent holistically and not separate hiring and recruiting and benchmarking, but it's all together. It makes sense when it's all together, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I love that we took the time to unpack this one, because this is really, one of the comments that came in is putting some rigor back into this process. And I think this is an area that we have to push. We have to push for this, because we a lot of times talk about outcomes, but similar to machine learning being called a skill, I think sometimes we miss when we say, well, we're focused on outcomes. And when you say, well, what do you mean by the outcomes? And it's like, well, we want to reduce retention. And you go, yes, that's an outcome, but we have to break it down a little bit more than that, because we can't necessarily action against that. And there's way too much variability in being able to unpack that. And I think the rigor behind actually breaking it down and saying, okay, well, let's really at a micro level unpack this. Now, my follow-up question to that, though, is, and I see a couple other questions that I'm going to ask, because this is going to be a fun conversation. One of the areas of opportunity, and personally, I think AI is helping with this tremendously, because this measurement space historically has been extremely difficult and time consuming. To me, this is why I think AI is so beneficial, is the fact that being able to benchmark and pull all these data points and do anything to actually identify, hey, we can do this at scale now, is extremely helpful. But I think sometimes as an industry, we can maybe reputationally be a little slow to take action. It's like, oh, we want to do this assessment. And what our business stakeholders can hear is, so pretty much you're not going to be able to do anything for us for quite some time. And when you look at the skills half-life, where, even in machine learning, you break that down, good grief, the languages are changing. It's just changing so frequently. How do you balance speed with assessment? Because I've seen companies over-index on assessment, and they go so far on assessment, by the time they get to anything actionable, what they're actioning against it's a dinosaur. It's like, well, it's kind of too late. You missed the window on that. So how do you help balance that? Because there is this need for assessment while at the same time not becoming analysis paralysis.
Yeah. I see what you mean. To my view is that I'm not too worried about the time it takes to take an assessment, because I don't think bottleneck is there. Actually, 2-hour assessments can avoid you taking a 200-hour course that is not relevant for you. And so if you think
I
about it
love
that
that.
way, it's the best investment you'll ever make. And so there's that. The second thing is, it depends on the assessment. You want to make sure the assessment is up to date, is current, and is in the flow of time. You don't want to take an assessment that is completely outdated and is measuring skills that were relevant 20 years ago. What I like to do typically is to structure the configuration of the assessment in a T shape or in a pie shape. What I mean by that is, there are certain skills that have a longer half-life. So for example, functional analysis, linear algebra, just 2 + 2 = 4. I think 10 years from now, you will still need to
That's
know
not
that 2
going.
+ 2
That's not
= 4.
going
It will be
anywhere.
helpful for, it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. There are other skills, and specifically in high technologies, which have a much more shorter half-life, and things are moving so fast that you want to be able to have the good balance between, our workforce has the foundations that allow them to learn how to learn, being able to acquire new skills because they have that foundation, but also being able to have cutting edge skills that allow them to deliver on projects. And those are probably what I like to call the vertical bar of the T, and may be updated much more regularly. But again, to go back to your question, I think assessment is the best investment a learner can make, because it can avoid them to lose time on content that is not relevant to them. Yeah.
So I'm really glad that that's what you brought up, because I think there's other areas in the tech space that I think that similar arguments, and it's about shifting the mindset, because people can just focus on, they might hear 2-hour assessment, go, our people just don't have time to take a 2-hour assessment type of a thing. But you can reverse that conversation by saying, but are you suggesting they have time to take 200 hours of coursework that may be completely irrelevant? And flipping that narrative can be a very effective strategy for being able to help influence some of these things, because you can have this initial react, well, assessment, that takes too long. That's too slow. We need to get moving because we need these skills right now. Yes, I hear you. I agree. However, to get those skills, and I think one of the things that we're getting at is, you don't build skills in an afternoon. I mean, this isn't something that you pick up. Oh, we need to build this, so can we quick push something out and then do that? And I think helping educate folks that is an important piece, that there is a serious time investment and money, financial resource investment in building skills. So do you really want to build them on things that are completely irrelevant? Well, we avoid that through assessment.
Yeah, completely. And I think that in conjunction with the assessment, you need to you need to understand learning modalities. So as an example, you do not serve the same type of content to someone who's a beginner in a domain compared to someone who's advanced. For example, if I'm a beginner, I usually would like to go for a more guided learning approach, where things are stacked on top of each other with a narrative and a story. But when I talk to my students at Stanford and I tell them, do you take this course online? They say, no, it's a waste of time. I don't want an entire course online. I want you to point me to the articles, the blog posts, the research publications, the videos on YouTube that are the most relevant for my skills gap. And so it's a completely different learning mindset. And the only way to really personalize it at that level is to understand the level of ability of those learners. Yeah.
So what's great is, you had me nervous when you started talking skill or learning modalities, because sometimes that goes down a path and I'm like, oh, we got to rein this one back in. But the point you brought up that I think is, again, a really important one for people in the industry to think about is that user maturity in the skill set does determine what they need from those things. And I think sometimes we talk about, let's focus more on performance. Let's just give everybody just in time the nuggets they need. That works for an advanced user who knows all the contextual information and can kind of contextualize it and go, okay, yeah, this is all I need because I just need to get this done. Mm-hmm. That person that has no idea what you're even talking about, to just give them a micro learning nugget of something on something as complex as whatever skill you're trying to develop, it will just leave them going, I can't even contextualize this or know what to do. And I think recognizing it's not an either or, it's a both and. But to your point, you can't do that if you don't know the maturity. If somebody just says, I have this skill, it's not enough because you don't know, well, are you advanced or are you not? And we've got to change what you need based on that.
Yeah. Completely.
Okay. So question follow-up. I'm going to bring up Rebecca's here because this to me is one of the challenges that I see our industry getting is we talk about skills as though it's a universal language, as though there's kind of the one language across the board. I do see variance in terms of how different organizations define it. And sometimes that nuance is different because a company may have different skill needs versus that, because even the examples you've given have been phenomenal in terms of breaking down, well, there's not just a universal answer. But how do you help bridge that gap? Because that can be difficult. Now, maybe the assessment ties into it, but how do you help orgs with that? Because I've been in meetings where people go, no, our skill in this area is vastly unique. And you go, I don't think it is. But how do you walk that line of custom skills, I guess, versus, well, no, this is kind of universal?
Yeah. Our position is that we do not want to reinvent the wheel at all. And we build an open platform that is highly configurable. So let me explain what it means. It means that we have our own proficiency levels. So for example, in a skill like data analytics, you would be at the end of the assessment, the upfront assessment, the diagnostic, you would be in one of three proficiency levels, beginning, developing, or accomplished. So it's a 3-level framework. However, we work with organizations that use a 4-level framework or a 5-level framework or an 8-level framework. And our framework is highly adaptable. So we can configure it in order to fit another framework. Similarly, every skill that we measure is at a certain level of cognition, and we use a modified version of Bloom's taxonomy to differentiate a skill that may be more at the knowledge level or recall or remember, a skill that may be more at the application level, do something with it, a skill that may be more at the analyze level, at the synthesize level, and we have this framework internally. But again, our open platform and the configurability of our platform allows us to fit the demand of a specific enterprise or a specific organization we partner with. Yeah.
Okay. So with that one, and I'm curious how do you though, because I think there are times where you say we're adding complexity into the mix for the sake of complexity. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions for folks, since you're spending so much time doing this, to help level set some of that? Because I can tell you personally, there have been plenty of conversations that I've had to go toe to toe with folks and say, we are making this more complicated than we need to. And there's no value in it. Having 8 levels versus 6. I mean, why are we going to this level? Or why are we defining this in 9 different ways based on business function when really we're talking about the same thing? How have you helped organizations through that? Because I have seen orgs create something they can't even manage because they just go off the chain with this.
Yeah. Well, a disclaimer is I'm not a psychometrician myself, but we have our head of learning and assessment. He's a psychometrician, and we have multiple psychometricians in their team. So if they're listening, I'm going to say sorry for upfront, but but I will try to explain on their behalf. What we do. I think that. If we look at our catalog, we have a ton of domains. It ranges from machine learning, we talked about it, all the way to digital literacy, that is for everyone in the company. What matters to us when we try to explain those skills and when we get to the executive readout to look at those skills and the data we have collected at an aggregate level and explain it and make decisions based on it, we need to have a standard setting, meaning we need to understand what it means to have a 75 in that domain versus in that domain and a 125. And so it's very important that there is a standard setting and there is a definition that can be written as a text to explain what a score means. Now, the details of what is the framework you're using for your skills taxonomy. I think all of that can be adapted, meaning maybe we talk about skills in a certain way and some other company talks about skills in a slightly different way. As long as there is a standard setting and we can talk about what people can do on the job in a comprehensive way, that's what matters the most to me. If I can explain that John and Alice have those competencies or skills or whatever it is called, because I have a standard setting and I can know the target scores and the scores that they have in those different domains, then we can have a meaningful conversation. That's what I care about. But again, I'm not a psychometrician myself.
No, but I think the message, because there's value to this in thinking about this beyond just even the skills piece, because this is the value in having that outcome-based conversation in general, which is really some of the ways you do this isn't by challenging it and going 3 levels. That's dumb. You need 5. That doesn't go very far with folks, because obviously if people are coming to the table with, we need to do this, there's a reason somewhere, whether we realize it or not. And being confrontational, it doesn't help. It only makes matters worse and people dig deeper in their trenches. But I think that point you're bringing up, which is extremely valuable for this piece, is being able to ask those questions of, well, how do these different levels make a difference? And that could be tied to a lot of things. Does it tie to our, promotion, our internal mobility capability? Are there promotion tiers that if somebody's at this level, would we pay differently based on that? Is it the way we recruit? Are there specific projects that we know we have to be able to differentiate? If you can have that, like you said, if you can have that discussion and dialogue and it can be well articulated, then okay, I can understand where we're coming from. But there are times where that's just met with I don't have an answer to that. There really isn't. And I've found personally, people are more in tune with coming to the natural conclusion of, okay, well, you know what? Maybe we can just not do that, because now that we're talking about outcomes and the need for differentiation, I'm realizing we don't really even have a good reason to differentiate. So for the sake of not adding complexity, let's not do it. But I think what you just brought up is a really valuable takeaway, because you can use that in a lot of things, because there's lots of stuff analytics is the same way. We need to put this in this dashboard. For what? What are we going to do with that? Is that a valuable, what does that data tell us? And when you can't answer that, then maybe you need to question whether you need it or not.
Yeah. I think the way I'm thinking about it is, if you get a 150 points in data analytics, maybe you call it level 2, maybe you call it level 3, maybe another company calls it level 4. What matters at the end of the day is, what does this mean? What is the definition of that level? Even if the actual numbering or framework behind the scene is slightly different.
Okay. All right. So this next question, I'm actually going to refresh my browsers because it says LinkedIn user, which doesn't help me. And I want to know who asked it, because it's a question that's near and dear to me on this, because this is an area that I don't think enough people are asking. So Sonia, thank you. Even though your name's not showing up, I know it's you. This is an area that, as this space is accelerating and we're capturing more data on people, we're learning more about them. In many regards, I don't think we're too far off from knowing more about our workforce than they know about themselves. The creepy factor kind of steps in terms of, well, what are you doing with that? And how is that being managed? And what rights do I have to all of this? How do you navigate that with organizations? Because this, again, to me, is a conversation that people are not familiar with. It's new territory. They haven't really thought about it. And all of a sudden they're saying, oh, I guess we didn't really think about it. And GDPR is getting involved. We've got all these other things that are happening, and it matters. So I'm curious how you work with organizations on this and navigating that gray area.
Yeah, I'm really glad someone asked that question, because I care personally a lot about it. I would say a few things. One is more tactical, very simple, being compliant. So we're SOC 2 compliant. We respect GDPR. All of that matters, and I think it's table stake. On top of that, we find different cultures in different companies. So certain companies and their learners want to share everything. They want their managers to see their learning, their scores and abilities, and that's perfectly fine. Our platform can enable that. Other companies are different, and all the levels of permissions and transparency can be embedded in our platform. So, for example, certain companies would like to see the data at an aggregate level, but not be able for the managers to go and see the individual's data because the data belongs to that individual. And so we are able to enable all these different permission levels and transparency. And finally, we also help companies with that. We have a suite of responsible AI and data assessments that cover AI and data fairness, privacy, safety, transparency, explainability, and that allows companies to deliver those assessments to their workforce and make sure that everybody who's working with the computer or artificial intelligence systems to do it responsibly. So that's another way we drive that conversation forward.
So I love the fact that you're putting the emphasis and effort into that, because that is one opportunity area I continue to see in organizations. As you know, they're rapidly adopting new AI technologies. They're rapidly doing more with the data that they have, and not everyone's taking the time to go, well, wait a minute, this is secure data that we're dealing with. This has to do with people's livelihood, and we need to be very, at least cognizant of what we're doing and intentional about that. But I think the two things that jumped out that I think for leaders who are talking with their organizations about this is that trust factor. I know I've worked on with orgs before where we've said, we got to build your trust factor, because that is a big thing. If you work with an org and you build the trust and people know that they can trust, you have their best intentions in mind, and the goal is to grow and develop you, and that's really what we're trying to do, you will see a lot more fruit out of that. And I've had organizations where I've said, you need to work on that before you start just going gangbusters on this, because you're not going to get the value out of it if you don't address some of these cultural or trust issues that are just wreaking havoc on your organization.
Completely, yeah, and I would even add that assessments are always tricky. You know, it's never easy to get assessed, and you never feel fully comfortable because you get to see yourself in the mirror. But we don't provide a software in a vacuum where, you know, figure how to deliver it to your workforce. Over the years, we've learned how to explain what are the, you know, perks and benefits of taking an assessment. And we know how learners can get super excited about, I'm going to see my feedback. This is a formative assessment. It's going to help me in my career. It's going to help me get matched to better projects. It's going to help me find the right content, rather than a pass-fail assessment or summative assessment where something's going to happen if you don't do well. Not at all. And so being able to frame and message and communicate that to the teams is critical. And we, of course, help organizations and L&D and, you know, business leaders do it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that messaging is key. And the thing you hit on at the end with it, because I saw a recent study that came out that, you know, one of the biggest challenges people say that they have with development is time. I don't have time. I'm too busy. I don't have time. Yet, hands down, my experience has shown if people see value in it, they will make time. They will make time for it. And everything we've talked about is about making it relevant, showcasing, hey, this is relevant. Here's what it does for you, things like that. I think the other piece that's an important conversation for business and HR leaders to have on this topic, though, is making sure, and you talked about this in defining the outcomes in the beginning, but making sure that there is a pathway on the other side of that. Because I have seen these things go down like the Titanic, where we do all this assessment, we do all this stuff. Hey, great, here's what you have. And then they go, so what does that mean for me? Oh, nothing. We don't really have anything, you know, for you to do with that, but aren't you so much happier now that you know? And you see people leave because they go, yeah, great. Well, then I now know where I'm at. I'm going to take that capability somewhere else because you weren't prepared. And I think it's not a wait to get all that figured out first, but it is a real thing that you have to prepare for and say, we need to have a plan for what we're going to do if we're going to put this effort into assessment.
Yeah, fully on board with that. And I don't think about assessment as a one-off thing.
Yeah.
And maybe the ancestor of what we do was you ask a strategic consulting firm to come in and run an assessment in your team, and you have a team of analysts that comes, interviews a few employees, and then delivers a slide deck. And it costs a lot, actually. But
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen that happen.
No, but
No.
what we do is, there is a pace of assessment. So learners, they take assessments regularly, and the more they take,
Okay.
the more valuable feedback they get, and they never get the same questions. Everything is adaptive through time, and so it evolves with them. The consequence is, on a regular basis, enterprises can now look at the continuous pulse of the skills in the company, see how much have we progressed in different areas. And so it's not meant to be just, here is the presentation, here is the
Once and
data,
done.
figure it out. We actually
Yep.
work with the enterprise to make sure we are tracking on a multi-year basis how the progress is happening, how are we hitting the benchmarks that you wanted to hit for your company. Some companies tie it to their OKRs to drive the workforce up in terms of skills. And then all the decision-making framework around it, whether it's internal mobility, whether it's precision upskilling, whether it's hiring and recruiting, all of that we support as well. And it requires us to often integrate with their talent and learning stack. So integrate with an LXP, with an LMS, with an HRIS, with other systems that they're using, to make sure that we're not just providing a slide deck, but we're actually providing a tool that's going to make them able to run their workforce more effectively over time. Yeah.
Okay. I love that you emphasize that point, because I think this is a shift in mindset when we think about skill assessments, because historically it has been this, all right, we rally the troops, we get a bunch of funding, we go out, we have somebody do this big comprehensive analytics thing, we spend a ton of time and energy on it, and then everybody's so exhausted and we've burned through so much cash that we get to the end and we go, all right, we did it. And the thought of having to go through it again in 9 or 12 months, people just, it's just not feasible. And I think what you're talking about is breaking that down and making it part of the just lifeblood of the organization of, no, this is an ongoing piece.
Yeah.
We aren't doing one skill assessment and go, here's what it was for 2022. We'll do it again in 10 years, but actually seeing how that's progressing, how you're measuring along the way.
Yeah, completely. And I would say one of the aha moments for me and for the people I work with is when you have an independent assessment engine, completely independent from the content. So you're not measuring against the content, you're measuring independent skills on the job. And you can see after 3 months how the average level of your workforce went from A to B, and you have tangible proofs that it grew because that assessment is an independent assessment unrelated to the content. And this is really the aha moment. It's the first time you can actually measure tangibly how we're progressing across several dimensions of skills.
Okay. So there are so many more directions that I want to go and questions that have popped up since that I want to talk to, but we would end up talking for a lot longer. So there's one other thing that I want to kind of highlight, because we can't even get into the ROI measured like impact thing. But I think one of the things you talked about right now that you hit on before the end is this ability to measurably show skill assessment, but also movement. Where is it developing and growing? And sometimes I've seen over effort on, okay, but what exactly in the business did that change? And I think there's some value in doing that. I don't want to dismiss it, but when you're sitting at the executive tables on things, even being able to do that is huge for an organization. And this is solving a real business problem in general. Just even the ability to say, where are our skills and are they growing and are they moving and are they going in the direction? That is a business outcome in and of itself. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets missed is it's always the, so then what? And it's like, I don't think people are fully understanding the magnitude and the value of that in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a very big topic and complex one. I think the holy grail of assessment is complete outcome. So down to the business outcome. I think it will take years before we can get to a level where we are able to connect it directly to the business outcome. But we need to start somewhere.
You have to
And
start
today,
somewhere.
yeah, exactly. And today, we can provide assessments on here are the cognitions that or the levels of mastery across hundreds of skills. You can start connecting it to projects. So some companies,
Yep.
they are going to tag a project with those skills, and then we do the mapping and say that this employee has 87% of the skills covered in that project, and then you can decide if they can work on the project, and then there is some ad hoc measurement that companies may use on the project. We want to get there one day, but we have to
Yep.
start somewhere. We need a gold standard right now, and then we can start pushing the boundaries of assessment, fully integrating it with the flow of work. But this is going to take a few years before we can fully integrate it with the flow of work, I think.
I love the transparency behind that, because I think sometimes the aspiration is just so far out, it feels unreachable. And I think that point that you focused on, which what a great way to kind of close it out, is this is a major thing. And it's okay to say, this is what we're focusing on right now, because this does matter. And we have to set the foundation. And if we don't set the foundation, you can't build the house. You can't do it. We have to get through this piece and get this right and get this working, or nothing else falls. So I'm going to close there, because again, we start getting into ROI, we're going to go for another hour. But on this one, the one question, and maybe again, it's not even a question, but maybe if you can, in the comments afterwards, some people are asking about some case studies, some things that may be able to help people start to contextualize what we're talking about and how are orgs doing this. Because I think there's a lot of talk right now. I think there's a lot of people still struggling to figure out the actual how, and what does it look like, and what are we doing, and how did you pull it off, type of a thing. And I told you we'd get to an hour and have just scratched the surface, and that's where we are. So again, Kian, thank you so much for joining me. I think there's more than enough for a follow-up conversation. Thank you to all of you who tuned in and joined, and all of you who listen after the fact. I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, Kian.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Looking forward.